Hey there, welcome to the James Show, News Talk 820 WBAP, now on FM at 93.3. Check out this report. I always find a lot to discuss and roll around in my head. Maybe you have something to add to this. But the headline, you probably heard something similar to this before. Dallasites need a staggering $27,000 hike in salary over last year to live comfortably. I usually don't talk about stories like this, but now you have my attention. Because whenever they say, like in this one, they're saying, if you're a single adult and you wanted to live comfortably in Dallas, you would have to make $91,770 for your yearly salary. And I always thought those numbers were sort of ridiculous and arbitrary. And I'm not wrong. They are ridiculous. They are arbitrary. However, if you take this fudged number, it's the same way we have to treat the unemployment numbers. Yes, that's not the real level of unemployment. But when you compare it to last month, did it go up or down? Is the fudged number higher or lower? So now, even in the fudged number, last year for 2023, it was 64,700 something. This year, 91,700 something. Okay, you got my attention. The fudged number jumped that much. The fudged number jumped by almost 50%. So this is an annual report that comes from Smart Asset. And let me break it down, because first I hate to go into too much nuance here because I don't want to bore you. But let me underscore first why I don't put a whole lot of stock in these reports to begin with. Because number one, if you're a single adult, you're not supposed to be able to live comfortably in a hyper-dense urban core as you would in places where the demand to live in that same space is much less. You're going to a high-demand area. And just think about how much the land is worth down here in downtown Dallas. It's worth this much because it's already dense and there's already so many people here and there's already such a huge demand and there's already so many offices and so many buildings and so much employment that people necessarily want to skip the commute and live as close to work as possible. However, since there's 70-story buildings here, that makes the dirt around it worth a ton more than the dirt that's north of Salina. Not as many people want to live there. There's not as many opportunities. Therefore, there's not as much demand. It's not as convenient for a bunch of people. So I always scoff at these whether they talk about Houston or Austin or San Francisco or even New York City. They're like, there's no way that a family of four can afford a single family house in a major metropolitan area. Where do you see a single family house down here? Of course they can't afford it. If you built the house that I live in Bug Tussle in downtown Dallas, it would be worth like $10 million. But it's not based on the sticks and bricks. It's based on the demand for this location. And so when you take a major metropolitan area and you break it up and it's not one contiguous city anymore, you have Dallas, which is the core where the highest demand, highest value property is. Don't at me about Highland Park. You know what I mean, just generally speaking. And then you break off all the suburbs. Well, of course, you're going to get a big drastic difference between what it takes for the average person to maintain their standard of living in a suburb versus an urban core. It's a ridiculous argument to make. However, when you take that ridiculous argument and you see it jump by almost 50% year over year, now we have something wrong. Now we have an issue. Because the other thing that I always reject about those is, you don't have a right as a single person to live comfortably wherever you want on planet Earth or even in America. In some places, if you want to live in downtown Dallas or you want to live in downtown New York or you want to live in some other place that has a high demand for other people to live there, you might have to get a roommate, and that's not the end of the world. Many of us did it. I did it. And so it's a little silly to say, well, Dallas is just unlivable. It's too high for people to live there. Really? Then how are a million people living here? Are they just, they're all dying? They're all just going broke. They're bankrupt. But I wanted to ask you about that. Have you been priced out of Dallas? There's a whole bunch of people that I work with because I'm down here in downtown Dallas. I'm right by the American Airlines Center. And people commute This is a job that I haven't seen commutes like this in a long time. I mean, I can't tell you how many of our people live on the other side of Fort Worth. There's people that live way up on the other side of Frisco. Wow, there's a lady I work with here that lives outside, like northeast of McKinney. So these people, they are choosing to commute down here because if you want to have a few acres, if you want to have, just say like a 5-acre spot, there's not a 5-acre plot of land you can buy anywhere near our work area. It's just not even a thing. So of course they're priced out, but that doesn't mean they're a failure. And that doesn't mean Dallas has bad policies. And that doesn't mean something needs to change about what's happening. It's just some people have unreal expectations. Another one that pops up is whenever they frame, this is a similar argument, but they're like, there's not a major city in America where a person can live on a minimum wage salary. Yeah, good. They're not supposed to. That's okay. If you're getting your first job working the drive-thru at McDonald's, you're not supposed to be able to buy a 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood with, no husband or no help or no roommates or whatever. That's unrealistic expectation. You people need to get a little bit of economic context here. But when you break down the cost of living in Dallas, whenever it goes by up by 50%, there may be signs that something's going wrong. Because according to Smart Assets salary requirement, a childless Dallasite would need to spend about $45,000, almost $46,000 of their salary on living expenses. They have a $27,500 discretionary expense, which sounds ridiculous, but come on, be serious. That is pretty close to what you spend when you add up your Netflix bill and your vacation bill and every time you go out to eat and every time you go do something entertainment wise or go to a Cowboy game or go to Six Flags or go to a concert. It might be more than you spend, but it's not a ridiculous amount. And then they also say you need about $18,000 to handle your financial obligations, whether that's paying off a credit card or saving in a 401k or an IRA or 403b or whatever you have. You're probably putting money away in that, or you should be. But then it comes up to the one that gets my attention is a family of 4 would have to spend $104,000 on living expenses, $62,000 on entertainment or hobbies. And now we're talking some real money. Family of 4? I have 4 kids. I'm a family of 6. Do I make enough to cover that? No, because now we're talking about over $165,000 a year just to get by. That's not even accounting for savings or paying down debt, because I really don't have a lot of debt. Do I make that much money? Absolutely not. But are there enough people who do make that much money that they are buying the houses and living the lifestyle that's up for sale? Yes. This whole article is couched as something bad. Something's going wrong in Dallas. We need to change something in Dallas. There's a flaw in Dallas that needs to be addressed because things are so expensive. In many ways, I could make the opposite conclusion from this story. Dallas is doing so well. People are willing to pay $165,000 for a family of 4. Things are so prosperous, people can afford that. Regular people who have 2 kids and a husband and a wife. The salaries are so high here that people, even with this level of expense, they're not running off to the suburbs, or they're not running off to a small town, or they're not taking a job in another market. They're staying here. I can make just as much of a case here that Dallas is kicking butt because these expenses are so high and our population is still growing. See, that's the real issue. If things are so expensive and your population shrinking, then you're doing something wrong. Or if your population shrinking and prices are going down, you're still doing something wrong. So even in a decline where, hey, it's like Detroit is cheaper than ever. Yeah, because people keep leaving because it's a failed state. And that happens. There's a lot of cities that are declining right now. New Orleans was on a big decline for a while when I was there. Detroit is like half as big as it was when you were born. Now, a lot of this negative media coverage on Dallas is born out of economic illiteracy or really economic laziness. And they just want you to be concerned. They just want you to be scared. But look, expensive, not necessarily bad. Is it growing and still getting more expensive? How great must the opportunities be in Dallas for this place to keep growing when the prices are so big? It must be amazing here. This is a great place to live. That is not a bad sign. Let's go to Laura in Dallas. You're on the James Show. What do you think?
Oh, well, I think it's great that that a lot of people can afford these prices, but there are a lot of people who cannot. And I know that I could not be living in Dallas if I did not have a home that I inherited. So I don't know how people manage who don't make a lot of money.
Well,
who are having to pay rent or mortgage.
See, there's so many caveats that you could put into it because Dallas isn't a monolithic block to begin with. I bet you could afford to live somewhere in Dallas, Laura, at the same standard of living or the same size of a house that you're accustomed to. You just might not prefer the neighborhood it's in.
Well, I've looked, and I like the neighborhood I'm in very much, but I would, in a way, I would like to be able to sell the house. However, I and others helping me have looked into it, and it's like, okay, you can sell the house for a pretty good amount, but there's really no place within Dallas, Richardson, Garland, this kind of central area that I could afford to,
Right, but why is that a bad thing? If a society, or let me say a smaller jurisdiction, if a community is so successful that more people want to live there, the demand to live there is high, prices go up. That means some people can't afford it. That just seems to be a byproduct of success and not something that's a problem.
Yeah, well, that's true to a degree, and that clearly is true. But I do feel like a lot of people are being priced out.
But I think that's a sign of success just as much as it is failure. I think
that's great, except that it is contributing to homelessness, which is obviously a very multifaceted problem. But that is part of the problem, and you're not. I just feel like that between. I don't know, I guess hedge funds that buy properties and, there are so many properties being bought by people as investments that are then not on the market for, say, young families that don't have lots and lots and lots of money.
I'm hearing a whole lot of subjective arguments in that opinion, Laura. I do appreciate you calling. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that I bet you could afford a similar size house considerably cheaper if you were willing to live in like Cadillac Heights. And that's in Dallas. A lot of this is, well, the average person can't live like they want to. Well, I know some people have to live in cheaper neighborhoods. I had to live in horrible neighborhoods when I first got out of college. Why? You don't start out at the top. You're supposed to start out at the bottom of society and work your way up in many respects. Back to the phones here. Let's try. This looks good. Philip in Addison, you're on 820 AM, now 93.3 FM WBAP. What do you think, Philip?
Well, I actually have to disagree. I am an older person, and I have to live in an apartment, and I'm being pushed out of my apartment. And what you said about society, in my apartment complex, I know for a fact that there are at least 3 families who are migrants that have 6 to 7 people in a 1-bedroom apartment.
Yeah, what's wrong with that?
It's a 1-bedroom. You're going to tell me that 6 people in a 1-bedroom apartment because is satisfactory?
Well, it's probably not my preference. It's probably not their preference, but I don't see air quotes problem. Why is that a problem?
My problem is the fact that, and I'll give you a great example. In 2006, my wife and I had planned to buy this house, and it was selling for $165,000. We did not get it because we went through a divorce, and then that house came back up in sale about 4 years ago, and it's up to 375,000. It's just ridiculous. I have a neighbor who just moved here from California. She's only staying in the apartment till she can get a house, and she can afford with her job that she's getting paid the same wages that she was making in California for a company here in Texas. That is, I can't even tell you how much more than someone who's doing who's did the same job here in Dallas.
Yeah, but for every homeowner who gets priced out and they can afford it, so they sell it. Like the guy who did, instead of you buying that house for 175 and they're turning around and selling it for, what'd you say, 300 something now? That is a 365. There you go. This dude just doubled his money. So when they talk about how this, one of the negative words they use for this is gentrification. Gentrification does not hurt the native population like they say. It looks like the native population got to.
I agree with you because I'm in the restaurant business and I have employees. First of all, I have so many of my employees don't even live in the Dallas area. They have to travel from Garland, Mesquite.
They do.
Say the outlying area.
I hear you.
And they're just like, okay, if they can't make their bus or they can't make the train or the trip, or if it's a horrible weather, they don't show up, and that affects everybody. I mean, it really is like a snowball effect because you're pushing people like myself and the average worker out where we can't afford it. We're like, we're getting to the point where we're saying, like myself, I'm ready to move. And I run I run a nice restaurant, but I'm ready to say, I give it to somebody else who, you're going to have to pay because the restaurants pay the same dollar amount. They're pretty much all the same for the position I'm in. And it's under like $75,000 as a manager.
I hear you. And I'm not saying you're wrong, and I'm not saying these problems don't exist for those individuals, but overall, I don't think that's a sign of some sort of policy or societal failure. I think that's normal. For all the people that are cutting grass in Highland Park, how many of them do you think live there? How many of the people you think like in Monaco that have to take out the trash, how many of them get to live in Monaco? Not everybody's going to get to live where they want. And if a community is so successful, the prices go through the roof, I think that's more of a positive than a bad. But I don't think the numbers are as dire as some reports are saying it. I don't think necessarily prices going up means there's a failure that needs to be addressed. Sometimes this is the natural consequence of success. In fact, this is a wanted consequence of success. How is it bad for a community to have their home prices all go up? For the people that live in that community, you would think that's a universal good. So how can this be couched as something bad? Well, you have to look for the victims. You have to use very loaded subjective words like gentrification, and then you have to appeal to the heartstrings and take a general anti-capitalist approach to it. And then maybe you could find a negative in this otherwise wellspring of good, because I think the statistic that's missing is the population growth, the demand to live here. And if demand is the reason why prices are going up, then that's the natural order of things for a successful community and not something to be condemned. What do you think? 800-288-WBAP. Let's try Mark. Mark in Dallas. You're on the James Show. What do you think?
You got me on there?
I got you, Mark. You're on the James Show. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. My phone broke out for a minute. Hey, you know what? I don't think it's so much that the problem's not that the prices are going up. As a homeowner, that's a good thing for me. The problem is that as they evaluate and figure out my house that I bought for $200,000 is now worth $400,000. So now the property taxes are going to be $300 extra a month. They've priced me out of what I've originally signed for a mortgage. So that in itself forces you to decide, okay, I sell when I don't want to because I can't afford to live in this area.
But you otherwise come out ahead because this house that you bought for $200,000, you're selling for $400,000. So you don't even have to count what you have paid into your principal already. It looks like you're walking away with the $200,000 profit. You're not really being financially exploited by the increase in demand in your community. It sounds like you're benefiting from it.
I would think that if I choose that I do not want to move, in other words, I bought a home that I wanted to make we'll call it my forever home. I think that by taxing me out of it is a different scenario than the value of your property went up. So they just keep raising to whatever valuation they want on the thing and keep raising the taxes, which makes my mortgage go up. So if you instead
agreed, but your problem here is you had the unreal expectation of this being your forever home and not that your taxes might go up.
Well, yeah, but shouldn't I be able to, as an American citizen, be able to say, okay, I bought a property, I've improved it, and I love it, and I've planted trees and I garden, and this is where I want to raise my grandkids. Shouldn't I be able to?
Well, if you're making an argument against property taxes in general, I in theory agree with you. But if you're saying you're okay with property taxes, they just don't need to go up significantly over a 30-year span, I think that's an unreal expectation. And if that is what you're looking for, you shouldn't buy in a metropolitan area that's growing, that is very reasonably going to have an increase in demand the longer you live there. Go live out in Buck Tussle like where I grew up. My parents didn't have any problems with people pricing them out of their houses.
Yeah, I agree with you to a point on that. I live in Terrell now. I was in Dallas when I called you, but that's why I said Dallas. But it seems to me that if they would set the system up to where, okay, you bought a house, this is what it is, you are locked into a 3% increase, 2%, make it up on your property taxes. Now, when you sell the property, if it values at $460, that's what you pay the taxes on. The new guy can start out at $460. With an expectation of paying X amount, but not jump from my mortgage going from $1,200 to $1,600 because the property tax went up that much.
Well, congratulations on making the point that I'm probably most sympathetic to, and that's the idea that you could be priced out of it because of property taxes. You know, I really don't like the idea of property taxes at all because it's just so an anti-private property move. Because you can think that I own my house, but really, if you have property taxes, the government owns your house and you're paying rent to Big Daddy landlord in, I guess, Austin for us. And that kind of falls afoul to the whole concept of private property and therefore free market capitalism and everything. So
I agree 100%. 100%.
All right. Well,
why not give us a sales tax? Say, okay, we're going to go from 8% to 9%.
How about
no
neither?
More property tax.
How about we just get rid of the 16th Amendment too while we're at it? I'm so anti-tax.
Yeah, right.
I know. Don't. I'm just fantasizing now. Thank you very much for your call. Eric in College Station, you're on 820 AM now, 93.3 FM WBAP. What do you think, Eric?
Hey, guys. Great show. A previous caller touched on it a little bit. And, I think the objectives for hedge funds and those kind of things like BlackRock buying up a bunch of homes. I get the idea, but I think their objectives are skewed for what the community actually really wants. I mean, yes, does it make property values go up? Sure. Does it also hurt the community by removing a tremendous amount of supply? Absolutely. Like here in College Station, there have been a couple of businesses that have gone out of business. They've been very successful, paid their rent and everything, but they're owned by, the Scion Group based out of Chicago. And, they have different objectives and they look at that budget, they look at that bottom line and say, well, we actually need certain businesses do not exist so we can get a tax write-off and just write off the asset. It's a little insidious and it doesn't actually help out, the city proper. And that's not a good thing. It's just not.
It doesn't sound like a negative. It just sounds like a trade-off. And you have, I don't know if it's a sentimental attachment to the people who were previously there versus the people who are coming in. Because, those businesses that go away, they're not just going to let that building stand vacant. They're going to be replaced. It's not like the businesses are being destroyed and the economy's going with it. They're being replaced. For everyone that is pushed out in gentrification, it's because a new, probably more prosperous or productive element moved in. And so, yeah, it's not just a destructive, it's a creative destruction that goes with it. So I don't buy the idea that just because old businesses closed in a neighborhood, that means it went downhill.
Well, you would think that, though. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, that you would want somebody who would come in that would, potentially generate more money. But these businesses in these areas, I mean, literally right on the corner of Texas and University, which is at the heart of the city, they're just sitting vacant, and they have been for 2 or 3 years now. So they're not actually encouraging that type of business. They're not encouraging growth. They're just using it as a tax write-off because it helps them. It doesn't help the city is the problem. And I understand, I'm a free market capitalist, so I don't want to exclude these types of dollars coming into a city, but you have to see that the objectives and the goals are definitely counterintuitive to the city proper.
Yeah, well, if BlackRock is intentionally, you're saying that whether it's BlackRock or someone else, they're intentionally losing money on these properties for the tax write-off benefit?
Exactly.
Then they're not. Then it's a self-solving problem. They're not going to be in business very long. BlackRock or whoever, these hedge funds that the nebulous concept of hedge funds, they're not in business to lose money. They're not going to leave that property vacant forever. There may be a temporary thing where it looks like, man, they're just not doing anything with that. But they have a master plan, and if they don't have a master plan, you don't have to worry about it. They'll go out of business. And I think what would be more dastardly if they did go out of business and then all the stuff that they own all of a sudden goes onto the market. What happens then? Property values go down. Does that help the community, or does that make it worse? Does that enrich the existing members of the community, or does that put them in the negative where they otherwise would be?
Well, I would say it's short-term pain for long-term gain. I mean, if you do reduce that, you suddenly increase the viability and the opportunity to have the type of gentrification that you're actually, talking about. Where you have pillars of the community that are providing business opportunities to areas that are providing, jobs for those citizens to better themselves. That's the type of gentrification you should be lauding, not companies based out in New York or Chicago or San Francisco or wherever coming in with their mega dollars to price people out in the community. That doesn't make any sense.
It does make sense because you have companies that are making money in Chicago and San Francisco and New York, and they're not reinvesting in their communities. They're seeing a better opportunity in our communities. And when you have millions and millions of dollars flooding in from the coast and from the other big cities, we're the ones that benefit from that. They're investing in us. You should want outside entities investing in your neighborhood. You should want outside wealth flowing in to your cash register, to your bank accounts. We are taking wealth from these other. Look, wealth would be leaving us if there was a company in College Station or Dallas, and instead of buying up housing in their own community, was buying it up in San Francisco, Chicago, New York. That would be wealth leaving us. But I encourage outside investment in Texas, and I don't blame them because they're better off investing here than in other places in many instances, and that's why they chose it. This is Kevin in North Richland Hills. Now, are you in North Richland Hills because you got priced out of Dallas or Fort Worth?
Hello.
Hey, Kevin, you're on the James Show. Go ahead.
Hey, great callers. Great arguments. Okay. And, but the thing that you haven't taken consideration of is the elderly being priced out of their houses. Okay. And increase in property taxes. And, we can't all move to bug tussle. Okay. And the elderly, my dad's 89. Okay, all his doctors are here. All right, and that's one subject that you haven't addressed.
Well, can I address it real quick because you sound like you're about to roll into another one, and I have some sort of answers for that. I don't know if it'll be satisfactory, but I can give it to you anyway.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so you have an 89-year-old dad. He lives in a house that he probably bought 30, 40 years ago.
1977.
Woo! So he's got appreciation beyond what we could just mathematically comprehend at that point. What about a reverse mortgage? Because if you're that late in life, having a house that's all of a sudden worth $500,000 when you only paid, I don't know, $12,000 for it in 1970 or whatever the awesome number I'm sure is.
$48,000. He did a reverse mortgage. Don't do it.
Why not?
I'm buying the house back. Okay. Because it's, I don't care what,
are you calling Tom Selleck a liar? Are you calling the Fonz a liar? Are you calling Fred Thompson a liar? There's a lot of guys you could put in that in that blank.
Tom Selleck. So anyway, I'm buying the house back. All right, and it's a big fiasco.
Look,
And,
I'm sorry, but I've heard stories of people who've clocked the reverse mortgage because their house is worth a ridiculous amount, and they've used that as a fund. The appreciation in their house actually enabled them to stay there and live a higher standard of living than if the price of the house had stayed the same. And conversely, what's the opposite of that? My college roommate, his grandparents bought a house probably back in like 1950, but it was in Oak Cliff. And Oak Cliff at that time, it was just sort of the middle class neighborhood. And when they got into their retirement age, the price of their house did not jump tremendously, and they did not have that option. And their neighborhood became a little more crime ridden than they preferred. And because they didn't have that appreciation, it was a lot harder for them to get out. They didn't have the ability to sell their house for a giant profit and go get a similar standard of living somewhere else from the money from the sale. So there are things worse than being priced out of your house. How about your price going down?
No, our price has gone up.
Oh,
okay.
I'm sorry. I just realized the time. I've been talking too much. Thank you very much, Kevin. Sorry to cut you off, but that's going to be it for the James Show. Stay put. Mark Levin's next. This has been James Parker on News Talk 820 WBAP, now on FM at 93.3.